Welcome. This is Peggy Devine. I'd like to welcome you to our second webinar for NCTN Advocates. We have a co-presenter today along with myself, and that's Miss Patty Spears. So I'd like to give you a brief introduction of who Patty is before we talk a little bit more about what the webinar will be about. Patty Spears has a Bachelor of Science and was diagnosed in 1999 at the age of 40 with locally advanced breast cancer. Following treatment, she began volunteering with the Coleman, North Carolina affiliate and has worked for them as a volunteer since that point in many capacities. She has previously been an advocate for the Duke University Breast Spore, the National Cancer Institute's Biomedical Informatics Grid, CABIG, the Translational Breast Cancer Research Consortium, TBCRC, and the Breast Cancer Steering Committee, BCSC. So as you can see, she's a very busy woman because she also works full-time as a bench researcher in microbiology at Duke, or actually at the North Carolina State University. She also serves as a community member of the Community Advisory Board of the Health of Equity and Disparities at Duke Cancer Institute. She's the recipient of the 2002 Susan G. Komen New Volunteer of the Year Award and has actually won many other awards. She's a friend of mine. She's a consultant for CISN. We're thrilled to have her here, and Patty will be delivering part of this talk. So thank you, Patty. Today's talk is entitled Tips for National Clinical Trial Network Advocates, NCTN. When we first had the idea of doing these webinars, Patty and I brought the information to the Alliance. We're both Alliance members, and asked them what would they like as far as talks. And one of the key ones was tips for new advocates. They were real clear that they wanted to have one of the very beginning talks, and that's why we're starting this series with these tips. Part of the other thing that they wanted was understanding the structure, the overall structure. So Patty's going to be talking a little bit more about that. But that's why we're starting with this series, because it came actually from focus group information from Alliance advocates. So we're doing these webinars to fulfill CISN's mission. We're a small nonprofit, but we work hard to build bridges between all organizations, and one of those groups is advocates. So that's what we're doing today. The curriculum, the website content actually came from quite a few people. Myself, Jane Perlmutter, Diana Chinkos, Sandy Feinstone, Patty Spears, but the PowerPoint was developed by Patty and myself. So again, welcome. Feel free to ask questions, but remember, we're not doctors, so we're not making recommendations, we're providing information. Today's learning objectives, by the end of this session, participants will better understand the new NCTN structure, understand the NCTN advocate role and their responsibilities, understand underlying patient issues, learn tips to operate more effectively, and learn how to articulate patient issues. So here's what we'll talk about as far as sections. Patty is going to talk about the structure, and I'll discuss the advocate role, responsibilities, and some core information. So let's start with the NCTN structure. Although Patty is going to give this section, I'll say just one thing for this slide here. It's important when you're working with a large group that you understand the players. And this is a very large network that includes lots of different groups, lots of different people. So Patty and I felt it was really important that you get a little bit of an overview of what the NCI looks like. The acting director is Douglas Lowy. Um, Division of Cancer Treatment and Diagnosis has James Dorshaw. As the networks were being set up, he led an awful lot of talks with advocates, so many of you have probably been in on those talks. Um, CTEP, which is the Cancer Therapy Evaluation Program, where all the protocols go to be reviewed, is overseen by Jeffrey Abrams. So many of you, if you've seen protocols come back, will have his signature on it. This is where networks send the protocol and get comments back, either approval or please fix this, please fix that. It's under his office that this happens. The Division of Cancer Prevention is under the director, Barry Kramer. If you see new results being put in the newspaper about this treatment or this clinical trial or that clinical trial, often you'll see his name quoted, and that's because he's the director of that division of the NCI. So people come to him for his take on the latest findings. Community oncology and prevention trials. The chief of that is Warda McCaskill-Stevens. So this is kind of an overview, and Patty is going to take it from here. So Patty, here you go. Thanks so much.
People are and where we fit in. So the NCTN, as you know, has gone through some restructuring. Can you go to the next slide, Peggy? I don't think I'm doing. I think it's gone. There. And whoops, I went too far. I think we're both doing it. So the major components of the new NCTN system has just come to fruition in the last couple of years or the last year, and there's 5 U.S. networks now for adult and 1 pediatric, 5 associated statistic and data management centers, 1 Canadian network group, 30 lead academic participating sites, 7 integrated translational science awards, and 1 radiotherapy and imaging core. And so this is kind of complex. These have all been applied for and granted out in the last year. And so there's this new structure that came out based on all of these different components. And I think I need the next slide. It's not doing there. And so they came up with this new structure. And if you look, for adult groups are here, and then the pediatric group is here in young adults, and the Canadian group is here, and we're all kind of held together by these centralized functions. And I think that's where the big bang for the buck came in the restructuring, is really centralizing quite a few of the different functions, which includes the central IRB, radiotherapy and imaging, and some common data management systems. And so I think we've really gotten a lot there. And you can see too that the other thing that kind of brings us all together are these 30 lead academic participating sites. And they're really leaders in the field of developing clinical trials, and they're usually the high accruing sites, and they're involved in all of the adult groups. And that's new this year, how that structure is going. And so I think that's going to be interesting to see how that comes out. And then each group has their own operations budget and operations people, their statistics and data management systems, their tumor banks, and then they each have their own members. They have member sites, so they still have members like they did in the old cooperative groups. So that's kind of how we're all held together. And then we also have over here to the side, it kind of puts it off to the side, is the CCOP and NCORE site participation, but it's not really off to the side. The NCORE structure did change this year too. That's not me. Go forward one more slide. There. And these were just just issued this past year also, or the past couple of years, where there's research bases. So each of the 5 groups has a research base for the new NCORE, which is the NCI Community Oncology Research Program. And also they funded 33 community sites, as well as 12 minority and underserved community sites within the system. And they're not really set off to the side, they actually interact with each other. So there is a relationship between the NCTN and the NCORE, and they do have different focuses. So the NCTN really focuses on the late phase clinical trials and advanced imaging trials, whereas the NCORE really focuses on the cancer prevention and control program trials, as well as the cancer care delivery, which is your PCORI type trials and comparative effectiveness research. So they each have their own focus, but they do overlap in centralized functionings, and they are very integrated into the groups. And so this is kind of the overall big structure. And now what I'll do is I'll go into, being a part of the Alliance. People are members of SWOG and ECOG Akron. It's really important to know how your system is set up and how the different components kind of interact within your system and who the key players are within your group as well. So next slide. So with the Alliance, you have a group chair and we have a group vice chair, and the different people. We have a central protocol office who we interact with a lot with Jeannie Fleming. We have statistics and data management with Dan Sargent, and you get to know these people and you really should know what their roles are. And an associate group chair with collaboration. And there was an advocate position that Betty Green had for many, many years within this structure as well. And 3 of the key things within here too are the translational research program that Fraser Simons does, as well as the cancer control program that Jan Buckner does, and then the American College of Surgeons clinical research program through Kelly Hunt. And these are, so the translational program has the translational grants within it, as well as all of those things. Let's go to the next tip there. And so you've got different committees within these programs. The cancer control program is a huge part of the Alliance, actually, which houses a lot of the NCORE programs. So that will be your community oncology, your health disparities, health outcomes prevention, symptom intervention, as well as in our American College of Surgeons, the clinical research program. That's where our cancer care delivery is housed, and that's where, if we get PCORI grants, they're usually within that cancer care delivery committee. So just knowing where your different committees are and how they're housed and where they're under is really important within your individual groups, which each group is probably set up very differently. Next slide. And then we have our main Alliance groups, and I think most groups have their disease committee groups where you have your big diseases by group. You also have administrative committees, and that's where your data safety monitoring is. We also have an ethics committee that quite a few of us advocates are involved in. Some of these we are involved in as advocates and others we are not. And then modality committees, and that's where our patient advocate committee comes in. And so that's where we're kind of housed with the clinical research professionals are there, the oncology nursing, and the patient advocates. So we kind of fit in there. So I think it's just really important. This was kind of to give you a really broad overview on, the NCI and how the NCTN fits in, what the NCTN is, and then within your group, just kind of figuring out where you fit in and who the different players are. And I think as advocates, it's up to us to really ask those questions and know who those people are as we move forward in what we do within our different groups. So I think I'll hand it back to Peggy, who will tell us more about our roles within our different groups.
So thanks, Patty. I think understanding that structure is important. We did some details for the Alliance just as templates for those of you in other groups. And so feel free to use those slides as templates and plug in, or just as an example so that you can begin to plug in how that works. Because not only understanding the national level, but your individual network level is important. So you know who the key players are and how that structure works together. So use the Alliance ones just as examples, and feel free to make any changes for your own site. So now we're going to move to the patient advocate role. Primarily, our role is to bring the patient perspective to clinical trial design, to every aspect of it. That's why we're there. NCTN is only involved with designing clinical trials. That's their core purpose, and we're there to bring that patient perspective to that clinical trial design. We're the experts on the needs of patients. Our focus is on that need. We're not there to help the researchers with their ideas, although what we do a lot of times forms their ideas. So our focus, again, is on the patient. And primarily, we're there to overcome design and feasibility hurdles early. And we'll talk more about that the entire webinar, how to do that, how to do it effectively. I think something new, that's been our core role, the beginning part. In the last couple of years, we've become more involved with involving the patient community, and that's usually through the organizations that we represent. We make them aware of clinical trials. We make the researchers aware of organizations that will be affected by those clinical trials so that they can work with them. So I think that's something new that we've done, and I'm not sure if other networks are disseminating results, but I'm assuming that they are in some way. At the Alliance, the advocates are very involved with that, writing patient-friendly summaries. And I'm assuming the other networks are as well. They may be through summary documents, they may be at the website, it may be newsletters. Somehow we've convinced the researchers over the years that getting the results out to the community and to patients is important. So that's another one of the roles we do have now, is to involve the patient community, both up front and in the back. And that's where we do bridge that gap between all stakeholders. We can bring the patient point of view to researchers, and we can disseminate results back to the community. So I think we do have arrows on both sides, which makes us really valuable to the networks. So here are some of the places where we can have an impact. And really, this is a hypothesis. It hasn't really been tested before. We're sort of in process, even though it's a 20-year process. We've been doing this about 20 years. What we essentially are saying that research designed with advocate input at all stages will improve that design. It'll enhance patient understanding, and that's our work back with the community. It'll improve patient satisfaction, and that goes to the whole health literacy about clinical trials, and hopefully advance public trust in researchers. The tough part about this is, although we've been involved for about 20 years, it's hard to measure what our impact is. This is what we say, this is what we promise, this is what's written into the grants. If any of you have methods for measuring that impact, please let me know, and I will let others know. I think one of the nice parts of this webinar series is that we can start sharing ideas with each other. So as we move forward, anytime you come to something that say, hey, this is what we do about that, please let us know. We will start a folder on the website. We will put things in it, and we'll also send messages out to everybody. Here's ideas and suggestions from other groups, because I think we have this rare opportunity for these next couple webinars to share best practices with each other. So remember, our focus is on the patient. You can see all these four circles, they all interact and overlap with each other, but the researchers have specific focuses in mind. They're focused on science, they're focused on design, they've got a clinical focus, how is that going to impact care, and we're part of that team to provide that patient focus. So let's dig down a little bit deeper. The science focus is really, there's a study objective to advance knowledge. It always starts with a question. How can we do this better? Is this new drug better? Is this surgical technique better? So there is always a science focus that begins every clinical trial. And that has to be designed. Do you use randomization? What are the endpoints? What statistical considerations are in mind? Researchers are all focused on this. And I think we can make impacts on all of these topics. It's not that we can't suggest something either about the science or the design. I think we do that, and I think that's good. But that's where the researchers focus. They're also focused on the clinical aspect of it. What treatment plan are we going to do? What drugs are we going to use? What doses are we going to use? What does the pathology review look like? What's the molecular assessment driving this? All of that is what researchers are focused on, with our input, I hope. But what we bring to the table uniquely is that patient focus. And it usually starts with outcomes. How is this going to be better? How is this going to change improve standard of care? That could be quality of life. That could be survival months or years. But we also talk and make comments on the number of extra tests or visits that are plugged into every protocol. We're looking at toxicity profiles and questioning doses and how often. Is the study schema understandable? Patients only can make a decision to be in a clinical trial based on that consent form and what patients and what their doctors are telling them. And a lot of that is through the schema. Here's what you're going to do. And if you've seen those, you've all seen them, they're designed for the researcher. They're not really designed for the patient. So if we can make those schemas more understandable, if we can say, okay, I know you understand that, I understand that, but the patient isn't going to understand. How can we change that? How can we improve that? How can we use pictures or colors or somehow make that schema understandable so someone knows what you're asking them to do? We also get involved with selections of patients, and that's eligibility. And we usually suggest widening that eligibility. Make it as wide as you can make it. For many, many, many years, it was as narrow as they can make it because they thought that was the best way to test something new. And then they found that once something got out into the general community, it didn't work so well because the test group was so narrow. So over the years, that eligibility has been getting wider and wider. But every time you look at a protocol, look at that eligibility criteria and say, can we get it wider? It's something we can continue to suggest every time. The informed consent document should have our eyes all over it, from the beginning all the way through. It is that one thing that patients are going to see, how it's written, its understandability, are there educational materials attached to it? All of that is something that we can be involved with. And is the study feasible? It took people a long time before they started focusing on is it feasible? And it's something we have to continue to remind people. Maybe this is very elegant science. Maybe it's a wonderful tool. But if it can only be done in a cancer center, maybe it's not something we should be spending our time and money on. It has to translate into the general population and the community, in rural communities, any place outside of the cancer centers. We also have a lot of impact, I think, on accrual and communication plans, making sure that they meet patients' needs. So I think you can see that although we can be involved with all of these other topics, we're very involved with the patient focus. And we do that by acting as an in-house focus group for researchers. When we pilot tested this at the Alliance, there were some people that looked at that slide and said, well, what are you trying to say? So let me explain what this slide is about. When researchers ask me, why are you there? One of the key things I always say to them is, I'm your in-house focus group, and here's why you need me. Back in the 50s, Ford just had separated from a family company into a large public traded company. And the first car that they put out as a publicly traded company was the Edsel. And they were all excited about it. The engineers had all this new money, and they had this technology, and they thought, we're going to give this amazing car, and they put it out there, and it was an absolute bomb. Ford lost a lot of money, a lot of credibility. In fact, the name Edsel is tied with failure. And the reason for that is they didn't ask people what they wanted. So they moved to the Mustang. And wow, the Mustang is still around, 40, 50 years later, because they had impact from the people who were going to use it. And that's what we provide. Which would you buy, an Edsel or a Mustang? So we serve as an in-house focus group. We're consumers in product development. We're not there as a sales force. We're not there to sell clinical trials or to get accrual high, but we can help you design a better product. And really, a clinical trial is a product. It's something that we're hoping people would be interested in. Our focus is on better treatments, better outcomes, quality of life feasibility, wide eligibility, diversity, and ethical issues that sometimes people forget about. We can bring all of that to the table, all of that in-house, so that Mustangs are designed, not as we want a success story at the end. So we've talked kind of about our role, and our role really is to serve as an in-house focus group and bring that patient perspective to it. But researchers, when you go into a meeting, especially if you're a new advocate, although we've been here 20 years, researchers turn over just like advocates. You'll have new researchers coming to meetings almost every single time. And if you're sitting next to one of those new researchers, they're trying to figure out what you bring to the table. And here's some of the things that I tell them we're not. Because this is the misconceptions about who we are. We're not fundraisers for your research. That sometimes is the first thing. Can you raise money for me to get this done? And you'll say, well, not in my role here. I can bring it to other groups. There's other ways to do that. But as your role as an NCTN advocate, you're not there to raise money for their researchers. And unfortunately, a lot of researchers think that. We're not activists. We're not there to throw rocks. We see ourselves as team members. We have been brought on as a team member. We're not invited guests. Again, we are a member of the team. For a long time, quite a few years, back in the late 90s, when advocates were part of the cooperative group, they were seen as window dressers. The NCI required that we be there. That has sort of gone off, and we are now seen as collaborators. It's taken a long time for that to happen, and it's still a struggle with new researchers for them to see us as a part of their team. We do not speak for ourselves, and so it's really important that we hold to that, that we're not here to find out about our cancer or my treatment or did I do this right or could I use this. We're speaking for the larger patient population, and once researchers know that, everything gets a little bit smoother. So it's very important that we remember that. We do not need to be experts in science, but we do have to have some core knowledge, and that's what all of the rest of our webinars are going to be about, to build up that core knowledge. It's very difficult to sit in a science meeting that's moving very quickly if you don't really understand what they're saying. So it's important to have that core knowledge, and we'll be sure to provide that in the next 10 webinars. We do not need to know the intricacies of each process, but all of that structure that Patty laid out, if you understand that, that will help so much, because you will know where the overlaps are. You know what each group is responsible for. You'll know the flow of how that protocol moves, and we'll go through that in really great detail when we have the webinar on protocols and concepts. We'll actually take you through how that happens. Although we don't need to know all the details, it's important to know some core pieces of knowledge. It's it's also important to remember that politics are in play. And this shows itself in two ways. Name matters, institution matters. Some of the people in that room have been doing this 20, 30 years. They're the leaders, the experts. And if you ever wonder why their trial seems to always be the one that's focused on, it's because of the power that they bring, the name and the institution that they are from. It's very tough for a young PI to say, well, I don't really think this is going to help. What are we trying to do here? I'm not sure it's going to change anything. He's going up against maybe his mentor. It's one of the things that we can bring to the table. We can say those things. Sometimes other people can't. The other thing that's in play is that almost everybody in the room is a practicing MD working at an academic center, and their advancement is based on their publication list. What clinical trials have they run? What have they published in this area? Every assistant professor wants to be a professor. It's really tough. For many, many years, there were way too many trials out there that were really there with not much focus on patient outcomes. And that's why all of this restructuring took place. How can we have this many years and this many dollars with not a whole lot to show for it? Part of it is because of this publisher or perish kind of mentality. So the new structure is set up to get rid of that, the top questions surface. Doesn't matter where they come from. Those top questions that are going to change practice, that's what we want to focus on. Not, do you need this published? So it's just important to know this, to know that for every person in that room, they need to publish something. And it's a very tough spot for them to be in. This is not their problem. This is the academic institution's problem, how they've structured advancement. And there's people working on that, trying to change that, trying to get more names on a paper so that you don't have to be lead author. This is not a problem that the researchers can fix. This is only a problem that academic institutions can fix. But understanding it from our point of view kind of helps to understand how some things make it through, and you wonder, how did this ever get this far? Sometimes it's because of politics. So in summary, our patient advocate role, it's really to bring that patient focus and to provide a reality check. So is this doable? Have you put in too many hurdles? If it's not going to change care, why would someone enter in this clinical trial? Our focus is always on the outcomes. And I think we can broaden the discussion again from that questions that others won't ask. We can ask questions because that is our role. That's why we're part of the team. That's why the NCI wants us there. And actually, that's why the network groups want us there. They want us to make sure that we end up with a Mustang and not an Etzel. So the sooner we can make changes to a protocol, the better. So we've talked a little bit about structure. We've talked a little bit about our role. Let's move on to advocate responsibilities, and we'll tie in some tips along with that. You can see the scope of the work is large, very, very large. All of these are in very tiny text. You may not even be able to read it depending on what size screen you have, but we will post this. A lot of things. We have a lot of things on our plate. When you're a new network advocate, there's a lot of things to learn because you want to be proficient in all of these areas. You don't have to know the deep details, but you want to know enough so that you can bring something to the table. So here's what to expect. Expect a steep learning curve. I mean, those meetings move fast. It's tough to walk into that meeting. Each one of you has now walked into a meeting where there's 100 researchers there and you may be the only advocate or one of 2 or 3 advocates. So it's important to learn who's in the group, and that's what Patty was providing a little bit of that overview. Each one of those groups, try to learn who that chair is, introduce yourself to the chair, to the vice chair, hand them your business card, let them know what your specialty is, and let them know that they can call on you. It's also really helpful to know the protocols prior to the meeting. They move so fast. There's little design teams that have been meeting by phone for months before the meeting, getting their presentation ready. They know the details in and out. If you walk into it and have only just heard of that protocol, maybe in one phone call, it's going to be tough to keep up. It's going to be tough to follow it and make any suggestion that's meaningful. So try to get a list of the protocols that are going to be discussed prior to the meeting. And take notes and refer back to that. It's important to know the language. You can't help if you don't understand what's being said. And part of that is the science, part of that is the vernacular, part of that is acronyms, part of that is just learning how people speak about their design. So this is all homework. This is all stuff. You may have been a research advocate for many years in other places, but when you come into the network and the focus is on design, then you want to learn the language around clinical trial design. Also take time to learn the issues that affect your patient population. Again, you're the person in that group that's there to say, you know, I don't think people are going to do that. I don't see how you're going to get them to come in for that extra 2 visits or that extra biopsy. You'll know much better than they will whether this trial is going to be doable. And that's really one of our roles, is to make sure that they're not putting so much in because they're interested in the science. That's not going to accrue because people just aren't going to do it. Always ask questions in the moment. Don't write them down and wait for some other time. It is a scary proposition to raise your hand in that room, but it's important to do it. It's really wonderful to know that you have a lot of support within that room, because people do see you as that person that's helping them make this a better trial. People are counting on you to raise your hand and say, I don't think this is going to work. They're looking to you. That's why you're sitting in that room. So make sure you ask questions. I think that is the one thing that is the most upsetting, is to see an advocate in a room and never speak, never raise a question. And you know they know this isn't going to work. You know they understand what's going on, but they don't say it. Because it's tough to say it. It's tough to raise your hand and say it. But if you want to be in that room, then you have to be willing to ask those questions. So here's some of the places where we can make the impact as it moves through the process. We can participate in the organ site committees when they're designing, all the way from where should we focus? Should we be looking at this? Should we be looking at that? Our input is helpful. All the while that concept is being designed, we can be saying, anytime you see a hurdle, say something then. The sooner it's cleared up, the sooner it's fixed, the easier it is. The time and money is saved. So be involved at the concept level. Be involved on the phone calls really early. Talk on the phone calls as well. Participate in other important committees, and the same thing, raise your hand, ask questions. It's important to provide formal reviews. We're going to actually do a webinar on how to provide a review for a concept in a protocol. We're also going to provide a webinar on how to make the informed consent document better. We're trying to make sure that we've got a Mustang, not an Edsel. So be involved at all of these levels. The other thing we can do is make sure that we support development of patient materials and outreach strategy. We've got our own networks. We've got lots of resources that we can pull together and let people know about. So be sure you're involved in all of those levels. So here's some tips on knowing the issues. I think the first thing you ask is this a science-only trial? And will it help patients? Is it going to make a difference? I think that's probably the first question you ask always. After that is, do you think people will be interested in it? Are there going to be accrual issues? Are there barriers in there? Are there hurdles that we can remove? Sometimes it's extra visits. Sometimes it's extra tests. It may be scheduling. You may just have to say, you know, why do you have them come in extra here? Can't they have that done while they're getting this done? It's digging into that schema deep enough so that you can make that experience better for that patient. The other thing that we can do is ask about competing studies. Remember, everybody's got to get something done. Everybody's got to get something published. So sometimes there will be 4 studies asking the same question, and that's not good. The NCI might be doing a study. Different groups might be doing a study. Always ask, are there other competing studies? Can we collaborate with them? I know the NCI is always looking for that. They're always hoping for that to happen. And it's something that researchers may not know. They may not know if there's a competing study. But if you've got only a small percentage of people who are willing to enter a clinical trial, and we know that's the case, and there's 4 trials out there asking the same question, they may never accrue because we've got it spread too thin. So it's important to make sure that we don't have competing trials. So that's the focus that you can bring to the table each time. And is it feasible? Sometimes there's a very sophisticated agent or device, and it's wonderful, and everybody's excited about it, but it's never going to be outside of a cancer center. And yet it gets far enough into the group so people are looking at it and thinking about it, and it's kind of up to us to say, you know, nobody's ever going to be able to use this out in the community. Who's going to have money for that kind of machine? So be sure that you remember that if it can't translate into the community, we really shouldn't be doing it at the cooperative group level. There's other places for trials like that. And they do need to get done because we do want that new technology out there. But the cooperative group level may not be the place for that. Here's some tips on how to be an effective, what those attributes are. And I think one of the big ones is that we can see the big picture. We're looking at the forest, not the trees. I was in a meeting once, and a researcher was talking about this very tiny little detail thing. He was stuck on this very minor little detail thing, you know, and I said, let's pretend that you're wondering why a tree is diseased in the forest, and you're trying to find out what that is about. So you go into the forest and you've got your binoculars on, and they're at 100 times, and you're looking at the tree, and you can see these tiny little bark marks and tiny little things right on this little square inch that you're looking at. I'm glad you're focused on it. It's important to be focused on it, but that's all you're seeing. You're seeing these very tiny little details. I'm in a helicopter, and I'm looking up above, and I can see a block away that there's this big polluted pool of water, and there's mosquitoes and bugs and everything else out there. Maybe that's what's wrong with the tree. So sometimes, just because we don't know the tiny details, we can see the big picture. And sometimes researchers don't look at the big picture. So part of what we can do is help them say, you know, you haven't quite seen the big picture here. I think one of our strongest attributes is being outspoken, a critical voice that needs to be heard. We have to be respectful of other people's points of view, but one of the things that I always remember is a chair in a group that I was in one time said to me when I came in for the first time, he said, tell me what I need to know, not what I want to know. And there are some people who want that from you. Unfortunately, there's a few people who aren't as excited about that. But I think that's why we are there. We're there to let them know what they need to know. in a respectful way so that egos aren't bruised. I think we need to be well trained, not only in the science, but patients' needs, what the researchers are trying to find. I think we're also collaborative. That for us, the work is the most important aspect. This is not our career. We don't have to publish. We don't have turf wars or advancement issues. We can pretty much say the truth about any given situation because we don't have to worry about any of the politics. And that's a big burden to be off our shoulders because it's tough for younger PIs and newer people in the field to go up against some of the big top people and say, you know, this probably isn't going to work. So I think we do bring that voice. We need to be accountable. And this is tough. This is tough for everybody because how do you measure that? Who calls you on it? There's very limited spots at the table. So we have to, if we're there, we have to speak up and we have to be accountable. We have to meet all of our commitments. It's probably the best way to look at this is that this is more like an unpaid job. Everybody else in that room is a professional at the highest top level of their profession. You've got the stars in that room. And if we come in and treat it very casually, that's not good at all. It's important that we're at the meetings. It's important that we're on the conference calls. We have to turn in all reviews and promises on time. If we're not doing that, we're losing accountability and we're losing the respect of those in the room. And we've mentioned it before that this is never about you. It's never about you. That when you're bringing a question to the table, you could say, would this impact this group because of this or whatever. You wouldn't say, you know, I'm a metastatic patient with this. Would this help me? So you never make the question personal, but these are people who you will get to know. And so you can ask those kinds of questions out in the hall. That happens with everybody. Everybody out there is sharing practices and suggestions between each other, and we can do the same thing, but not in the room. So let's talk about some ethical issues. We know that a clinical trial is a research study. It may be better than, the same as, or worse than standard of care. So as we're working with our communities, it's important for them to know that as well. Therapeutic misconception is people think this is treatment and that it's going to automatically be better. And we don't really know that yet. We're testing it. So it's important that we do remember that as we're conveying information to the organizations and the people that we represent. Biospecimen collection. I mean, precision medicine is the future. We absolutely want to go down that road. Tissue collection is necessary to get down that road. And how do we talk about that? Are biopsies mandatory? Should they be mandatory? Does it depend on the site? Does it depend on the health of the patient? All of those are issues that I think we can raise as protocols come up. Who has access to the data? Who has access to the tissue? Those are issues that other people won't ask, but maybe we should be. In fact, we should be. Minority issues have to be addressed. And that's bigger than ethnicity and race. It's age and location. Are you rural or not? There's a lot that goes into underrepresented groups. It's up to us to make sure those underrepresented groups are represented. So some tips on communication. Build relationships. It's important. Talk in the hall. Have lunch together. Email each other. Do whatever you can to get to know the chair, the vice chair, and the members on that committee. Now, large committees, it's tougher. Smaller committees, it's easier. But I think one of the strengths of having the advocate in the room during all of this is that you can build relationships. Keep your questions clear and concise. I think writing them down beforehand helps. You can frame them so that feelings aren't bruised. You can say, help me understand, or I'm concerned about, or I'm wondering if we could do this. Everything that gets to that meeting has been in a work in process for years, taken time and money and effort, and the questions need to be phrased so that they're not belittling. That person has a lot invested in that study. So if you're going to critique it, you want to do it in a way so that it becomes better, so that that study becomes better. And if it can't be fixed, then somehow convey that concern that, you know, I'm not sure where we're going to go here to make this better. Let's talk. Let's see what we can do. How can we fix this? So let's do a summary of responsibilities. It's really up to us to ensure that that trial design meets patients' needs, that by the time it comes out of that group, that it's well designed, that it's feasible, that it includes a diverse population, outreach strategies, accrual and communication plans. It's also important that we meet all of our commitments. So while we're providing input, we have to do that by attending all the meetings and calls. I think it's important for us to reevaluate our health and time, probably yearly. Is this something I can still give all my time and responsibility to, enough so that I'm meeting my commitments? Recently, I rolled off the Alliance as an active member because my focus now has become more involved with the nonprofit. And although I'm still on the roll and I still make phone calls and I still am available for small projects, I don't attend the meetings. I don't sit in the committee meetings. I don't review protocols. Somebody with more time is now doing that. So I think each of us has to do a little soul searching, probably yearly. Am I able to do this at the level it should be done? Also remember to respond to emails and requests promptly. It's one of the things that I hear grumbled about by researchers probably as much as anything. I emailed her. I never got back to her. You know, she didn't get back to me until a week later. A lot of these things happen really quickly, and that discussion is happening in that email. And if you only check your email once a week, you're going to miss what's happening. So if you want to be involved at this level, you probably need to be checking your email at least once a day to make sure that you're not missing something. If something's being decided and it's a 2-day window or a 3-day window, you may have missed it if you only check once a week. So remember, this is a part-time job. So that was the summary of our role and responsibilities. We'll have time for questions at the end, but we're going to move to the core competency issues section now. And if you can see this fellow here going, you know, he's conveying, I'm really not sure of any of this. You know, I've got a question about this. And that's why we're conducting these webinars, to try to keep this level of unsureness away from you, so that when you walk into that meeting, you are feeling confident and able and capable. So some of these issues are things that you may have thought you knew. You are a survivor, or someone in your family is a survivor, or you've cared for survivors. And so you know that personal patient experience. But we're going to go a little bit deeper and a little bit wider, and we're going to talk about it because our hope is that you can convey all of this information back to the researchers. You can do it through the design, how it's designed. You can do it through the consent form while it's being written, to make sure that they're aware of all these different areas. So in the general public, there's issues around health literacy, changing demographics, cultural differences, decision-making and learning styles are different amongst people. And for cancer patients, they've got all of that, plus their diagnosis. We're also going to talk about the core science base that we're hoping you all have. So what is health literacy? It's something that our nonprofit's been focused on really pretty thoroughly for the last 2 or 3 years, because I'm beginning to think that's the key of the next area that I really, as a nonprofit, want to work in. And it's the degree to which individuals have the capacity to obtain, process, and understand basic health information to make appropriate health decisions. And that goes way past the skills of reading and writing, which is what most people think. When they think health literacy, it's can you read something, can you write something? But it's numeracy, and that do you understand percents, risk benefit? Most people have a very low understanding of that, and that needs to be explained in a clinical trial. Listening and speaking, are they English speaking, limited English speaking? All of that goes into health literacy. Plus, it relies on cultural and conceptual knowledge. And you'll see from our next couple of slides that we have a problem in this area. This slide was put together in 2003, which is really old, and yet the new data from 2014 is about the same. I used this slide because it was so well put together. The other data was all in paragraph form, but the numbers, only about 12% of the population are proficient in health literacy. That's really low. When you put that together with the diagnosis and the stress and the fear that goes along with that, people are operating with a tiny, tiny little bandwidth, and you're trying to get them to sign a consent form. It's sometimes understandable why we have a 3 to 5% accrual rate. People don't understand what you're asking them to do. We also have a big problem with changing demographics. This data came from 2006 because of the way census data comes out, but from the data that hasn't been crunched but being said, these numbers are getting worse, not better. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans, about 47 million, speak a language other than English at home. This is really tough for people trying to consent. There's over 350 languages that are spoken in the U.S. It's wonderful to be a nation of immigrants. That's who we are. But it presents some real problems and situations for medical personnel to know, to understand it, and to have strategies in place to fix it and to deal with it. By 2050, the non-Hispanic white population will be 46% of the total U.S. population. And many of those people will be limited English speaking or non-English speaking. I don't see a whole lot of changes going on in hospitals to deal with that. It's something we can continually remind researchers about. Over 50 million U.S. residents don't speak the same language as their healthcare providers. That's really tough. It's important that we understand and share that information with people. Here are some cultural differences. When people talk about culture, they usually talk about race and ethnicity. And yet you can see from this slide, it's much, much, much bigger than this. You put any 2 people next to each other, and they're going to respond to something differently. Because it has to do with health literacy, abilities, spiritual beliefs, values, economic realities, language, all kinds of things go into that cultural differences, and it's not just race and ethnicity. It's important for researchers to know that they can't read that consent form to everybody the same way and expect people to understand it. And it's up to us to let them know that. People also have different decision-making styles. I won't go through each one of these. You can read them. You can go back to them. But essentially, it's the same thing. If you come into a room and the right people aren't in that room, if somebody needs their spouse there or some other member of their family there, and you're only giving them 15 or 20 minutes, they're going to say no. And it may have nothing to do with the study. It may just be that the person that they're going to turn to isn't in the room. So many times at the clinical level, the same doctor, the MD says, oh, go home and think about it. Talk with your friends, talk with your family, read about it. You know, here's a brochure, here's a video. But if they're asking them to be in a clinical trial, they give them 15 or 20 minutes. And they're not even the one talking to them about it. It's a clinical research associate who may have a skill set for data management, but not so much communication. They don't let them take it home. They don't let them come back and ask more questions. So say that all the time. If you're in the CRA committee, if you're in the nurses committee, make sure you raise all these points. Make sure you let people know that how people make decisions is important. Learning styles matters. We learn best when there's a match between our preferred learning style and how new information is presented. Most people know that when someone goes to a doctor, their spouse will say, well, what did he say? And the person goes, I don't know, I can't remember all of it. And that's maybe for a hurt toe or foot or bruised leg. With a cancer diagnosis, people are in real stress, very, very afraid. So most people revert back to being a visual learner. Even though they may be an auditory learner when they're healthy. When they're in stress and afraid, people revert back to being visual learners. And our consent process isn't set up to help people understand information visually. It's usually just a written form with somebody reading it to you or talking to you about it. So it's important that we remind people to develop brochures and develop calendars and schemas that are understandable. All of this matters. We're not stuck at that 3 to 5% for just one reason. There's a whole lot of reasons, and part of them are all attached to that patient experience. The myth out there is that all patients are the same. You know, they've got a terrible diagnosis, they're afraid, they're scared. We understand that. Of course, we understand that. You know, we're very sympathetic. We know how hard this is. What they don't know is that we all respond differently. All of us. With a cancer diagnosis, you've got to make treatment choices. It may include a clinical trial. There's family concerns, financial worries, employment concerns. This is different for every single patient coming in. People understand risk benefits differently. They understand study versus standard differently, confidentiality. What does that mean? Randomization, I have no idea what that is and why would I want to do that. Fatigue plays a role. All of this stuff is in play. And it's different for each person. So if that person going into consent does it the same way, and unfortunately that is the case, it's up to us to bring to these committees, the CRA committee, the research committee, the nurses committee, and even while they're designing the clinical trial, remember, people are going to have trouble with this. They're not going to understand what you're trying to say to them. This consent form isn't going to work. You can share these slides, you can share the information on it verbally or use the slide. I think it's important that we make sure that every consent form comes out with some visual materials, education materials. And this is why. So let's move a little bit to understanding the basic science. There are a few advocates out there who think, oh, you know, no, all I need is to know is the patient experience, and I can come and be useful. And what we're suggesting is probably not. If you don't at least have a core understanding in science, it's going to be very hard to sit in that meeting and make a suggestion that's going to help. And if you're the one person in that room that can fix it, but you can't quite handle it. It's moving fast, you know. So we're hoping that our series of webinars will give you all of that outside understanding. There's a lot of other good resources out there. RAND does a lot on advocate education. The NCI does some. Your home organization may do stuff. Make sure that you look everywhere you can. There's genomics for dummies. There's all kinds of tools out there. Attend science meetings whenever you can. They will be really helpful. They also move very fast, but it's funny. We're sort of like sponges. The more you hear information, the more you can kind of piece it together. You can always go back to our website and relook at what is this proteomics really about. So do what you can and ask questions all the time. One of the most wonderful things about being an advocate in the network groups is that you have lots of people to ask questions for, and they're wonderful about answering them. So make sure you use that. Make sure you use your network. Ask them to come and speak at your advocate meetings. If you're interested in pharmacogenomics or precision medicine or mandatory tissue biopsy and the pros and cons of that, bring people in, talk about it, discuss it, and always ask for help. There are lots of people around that are willing to help you. So I think with basic science knowledge, your impact will be felt much better. So an overall summary, by definition, we're providing the patient perspective. That's why we're there. I think we're collaborative by nature. We're interested in the outcomes, not the turf wars. And we really do ask the tough questions. That's our role. It's important that we understand patient issues. It's important that we have a core science background and some good communication strategies. We want to be able to focus on feasibility, accrual, diversity, minority enrollment, and the need for patient education materials. And some of our previous slides showed why it's so important to provide good patient materials with it. So that is our summary. That is our conversation for today. I'm going to move it one step further if I can. This is a suggestion, and this is something that I've finally realized that after being involved since 1997 as a research advocate and a cooperative group advocate since 2000, accrual was about 3 to 5% then. It's about 3 to 5% now. And it's not that I don't think we're making a difference. It's not that I don't think people are trying hard. I think everybody is doing a whole lot of stuff, but I think the one piece that's been missing is the community health literacy level, that people need to understand what clinical trials are before they get designed or before they get diagnosed. They need to know what tissue donation is before they get diagnosed. So what I'm hoping, what I'm suggesting, is that each of you think about it, see if you might be willing to take this next step. I only took this next step 2 years ago. I had never done this before, but starting 2 years ago, I started speaking to Rotary groups and women's groups and men's groups, and any group in my town that had a half-hour slot, brown bag sort of thing. And it's, 30 minutes, and you talk about cancer research, or you talk about clinical trials, or you talk about precision medicine, or you talk about tissue donation. And they're excited about it. They want to know. And I'm hoping that as we train the larger community, maybe we can raise health literacy levels. Maybe we can bump up some of this school just because people more understand what you're doing. So think about it. Use our trainings. You can go online and get all of them in PowerPoint format. The ones that I send out each time, you can actually get them in a PowerPoint format where you give the training to your home organization or to your community. So I'm hoping you do that. I'm hoping that you will spread the knowledge. So this is for our legal team. We don't need to go through that. So I want to thank all of you that are here, especially Patty Spears, who was involved with not only writing the web content for this, but also the PowerPoint development and delivery, the Alliance, the Patient Advocate Committee, who focus group this, and Pat Gavin, our chair, made that possible, and also to Laura Cleveland, who some of these slides are massaged ones that she used many years ago in the coalition. So thank you, Laura. So that's